Okay, thank you very much. Hello and welcome everyone that's joining us today for our Lunch and Learn. We're here for the fifth annual Supporting Innovative Practices virtual conference. Before we begin, just a few quick logistics. So this session is being recorded. It will be archived on the conference agenda page for 1 month following the conference, and then on our website, sipimpact.org, thereafter. Closed captioning is available by selecting the CC button that should be kind of in the bottom right-hand corner of your page. With that, my name is Sara Bleeg, and I'm honored to be your host for this live podcast session with Alex Partridge. Alex, if it's okay with you, I'm going to give you a quick introduction, and then we'll fire away with some questions.
Sounds
Sounds good?
good.
So, if you didn't know, Alex is the founder of two of the world's most influential social media news and entertainment platforms. He's widely recognized as a pioneer who helped shape what modern social media culture has become. Or, as I like to see it, Alex went viral before viral was a thing. Beyond his success as an entrepreneur, he's also been involved heavily as a leading voice in conversations around ADHD, neurodiversity, and rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. So, following his own ADHD diagnosis at 34, Alex has begun openly reflecting on the ways neurodiversity influenced both the success and challenges of his life and career. He's become a TEDx speaker, a Sunday Times bestselling author, and is the host of his own viral podcast, ADHD Chatter, where he's interviewed leading experts, psychiatrists, creatives, celebrities, all about neurodiversity and mental health. So, drawing from both his lived experience and years of learning with conservation conversations, I can't speak, with leading experts, Alex brings a perspective that's honest, insightful, and deeply connected to this year's conference theme: belonging by design, innovative practices, and impactful outcomes. On a personal note, while Alex and I haven't connected in over 2 decades, we actually attended the same elementary school back in the UK. So I'm obviously now in California. Alex is coming to us from East Sussex. It feels especially meaningful to be hosting this can't say the word conversation with you today, Alex. Knowing the impact you've had on my work and my learning, and also seeing the impact your work is having around the world. So, with that, Alex, I'd love to throw the question out there. Can you share a bit about your journey and how ADHD has shaped your journey?
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, and such a lovely introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here from the UK and East Sussex specifically, which is on like the south coast of England. If you're trying to visualize where I am, but yeah, so I mean, ADHD has always been there in my life. I've only known it was there for the past 3 years when I got diagnosed at 34 years old. But looking back, there were always clues and little like whispers that it was there. I mean, I've definitely always felt different and misunderstood in many ways. I think my earliest memory of feeling different was when I was probably at the same school we went to. Actually, I remember I was in the playground. Probably I was about 6 or 7 years old, and someone said to me, "You could be one of the cool kids, Alex, if you weren't so weird." And I had lots of little weird, unusual comments like that when I was younger,
Mm.
which I didn't really think too much of, but I think they certainly probably compounded and added up throughout a childhood that made me feel very ostracized in many ways.
Mhm.
Uh, I've got very clear memories of going to school and everyone playing in the playground and playing football and whatever it was. And I just kind of retreated to the library and just hid, really, and looked out the window and sort of was observing other kids kind of being what I assumed was normal, and me just being so anxious to go outside and integrate. Um, but there's always been like an impulsivity, an ability to kind of spot patterns, a very like an entrepreneurial side to me from a very young age as well. Um, in a different environment to one where I didn't feel anxious. I always felt very anxious in the classroom. Um, I always felt very scared in school most of the time. But when I was at home at a similar age, I was making money and starting businesses. My first business was when I was 7 years old, and it was like a board game. And I remember kind of impulsively designing this board game, creating all the little pieces, writing the instructions. And I sent it off to all of these different companies that manufactured board games. And I had one reply, and it said, I think they could tell I was really young because my handwriting was super messy, but they said, we're not looking for any new designs at the moment, but always lean into this entrepreneurial spirit. So it's
Mm.
always been, there's always this like separation between how I was behaving compared to other kids. Like when I was at school, I was very internalized, very quiet, really not performing very well in many of the metrics that a child is judged on at that age, like exams and schoolwork and stuff. I could never focus on it. But at the same time, when I was at home, I was doing things unusually too. Like most kids were playing computer games and going to the park and having sleepovers, and I was being super entrepreneurial. So there was definitely a difference that I was aware of from a very young age. And I think that has sort of continued throughout my life and made me realize that many of the things that I was anxious and made to feel different about when I was younger, i.e., being quite insular and being entrepreneurial and somewhat different, has actually, I believe, turned out to be one of my biggest strengths as an adult.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, so thank you for talking a bit about your school experience. Could you dive into that and tell us, like, when did you sense a true sense of belonging in school, or maybe you didn't? Were there different environments where you did feel like that was created for you, despite that sort of insular experience you reported?
So there definitely were moments. I feel like there was a significant lack of awareness and understanding what
Mm.
an anxious child looked like, and if a child was being very quiet or behaving one way in one situation and then suddenly differently in another situation, there was very little like awareness about why that might be happening. I feel like that's considerably better now, which is amazing. Had there been back in when I was at school, like a very simple or a better dialogue between my parents and the school. Had my parents sort of said, Alex is quite entrepreneurial, he's starting businesses at home, and the teachers put together a similar thing saying Alex is very quiet, he's very introverted. That difference could have been, I think, perhaps picked up at a younger age, and that question could have been asked, like, why? What is causing this difference? And maybe at that stage, the conversation of neurodiversity in me would have started earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and various interventions could have been put in sooner. And I know that's a much better piece now. We teachers are a lot better at recognizing neurodivergent conditions. We know to put movement breaks in classes and put visual reminders and clear itineraries of the day to sort of take away a lot of the anxiety over uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think, I had some great friends at school. I can't discredit that at all. I think looking back, when I went to the library, I was friends with other kids who also went to the library. And looking back, I guess that was me kind of finding my tribe at a super young age,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing, not everyone is comfortable and enjoys going out and being sociable in the morning. Some people are quite introverted and like to keep themselves to themselves and have a very different idea of what fun is for them. So looking back, there was definitely I was able to see difference in other people as well. I just didn't have the understanding to sort of put all the pieces together to recognize that how I was behaving, albeit was slightly different to what I considered was normal. Like there wasn't anything wrong with that. And I feel like back then and to an extent now, kids who do feel different and they do actually, because of that difference, like they do feel that they're broken. And the long-term consequences of feeling like you're different and misunderstood, and for whatever reason you don't fit in, can be devastating. Which is why it's such a big driver for my work now to raise this awareness in all areas, education, social, and generally.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate this focus on, like, you had these skills as an entrepreneur, but there wasn't necessarily anyone in school that even knew about that and was able to nurture this other sort of thing that was able to bring you out your shell more. Um, and I appreciate that you seem to encourage this asset-based approach to ADHD, like focusing on what strength skills do have. But I've also noticed from listening to your podcast that you're an advocate against referring to ADHD as someone's superpower. Can you explain more about that?
Yeah, so I truly believe that ADHD can be extremely powerful.
Mm,
There's many strengths that I associate with my ADHD. I think ADHD has made me very creative. It's made me be able to spot patterns that many people miss, which has
mhm,
enabled me, I truly believe, to spot gaps in the market and to analyze trends on social media, which had I not had that strength, I wouldn't have made two global social media brands. I think people with ADHD are the world's best problem solvers. I think they've had to learn the solution to feeling different from a very young age, which is masking and to hide who they are in order to fit in. And that's a whole conversation. But that ability to solve problems is so ingrained in them because they have had to stay alive that
mm,
that transitions into other areas. They're very good at problem solving in business, in the classroom, in the workplace. So there are many strengths associated with having ADHD. I think the reason I wouldn't call it a superpower is because the data shows that if you have ADHD and you don't know that you have it, and you're living a life unaware, and you keep starting businesses, or you keep jumping into relationships, or you keep starting hobbies, and then you lose interest and you give up on another thing, or you can't understand why you feel so lonely, even when you're in a busy party, because the version of you that's connecting with people isn't actually you. The comorbidities and the knock-on effects to one's mental health, if you're living with ADHD and you don't know it, are devastating. You know, heightened anxiety, heightened depression. Women, particularly with ADHD, when they don't understand that they have ADHD, you know, they're 4 times more likely to have really catastrophic thoughts. Um, that's not a superpower to me. I think what can change it from being a condition of great struggle into great strength and lean into the many powerful assets that come with it, is like an understanding and awareness, which is what, you know, what I'm trying to do, and many others and events like this are trying to do. And also changing your environment, because it's rarely anything wrong with the person. It's often the environment that they're in, which is
yeah.
enabling them to not feel like psychologically safe enough to really advocate for themselves and to ask for very minor adjustments that would enable them to manage their struggles better and to let the strengths come forward. So to go back to your question, is it a superpower? I don't think as a blanket statement it is a superpower. I think it's the answer is more nuanced than often as it often is with these questions. I think it can be beneficial, you know, particularly with young children, to say that it can be very powerful, because yes, there is an argument to say that a child gets diagnosed and they look up what is ADHD and they see the word disability and disorder, and it can be very disheartening. So I think there is a positive to putting a positive lens on it for kids, 100%. But there is also a risk that somebody who is struggling with ADHD, which, you know, still sadly is the majority of people who have ADHD, and they'll see somebody who has done amazing things, or they have, you know, achieved success in the eyes of the world, call it a superpower, and they might be sat there in a really dark place and go, not only do I have ADHD, which I'm really struggling with at the moment, I must have the really bad version of it, because I don't feel like it's powerful at the moment. So I think it can be very powerful. I think there are many, many strengths to having ADHD, but they only come when there is a foundation of understanding and awareness.
Thank you. I appreciate you pulling apart that nuance, right? And appreciating the challenges it brings and being honest about that and not overlooking it and trying to sugarcoat people's experience while also recognizing the unique assets it might bring certain individuals if they have the right supports in place. Talking about comorbidities with ADHD, one of the things that I've learned from your podcast a lot more about has been about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Can you explain what this is, what it might look like in children, and how we can better support students who might experience this?
Yes. So rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or often abbreviated to RSD, is it's an exquisite response to real or perceived criticisms or rejections. A tiny comment, like perhaps your friend saying they're too busy to see you, can trigger a complete nervous system collapse. That feels like you're being attacked. People describe it as a bull charging at their chest, or literally a stabbing sensation in the heart, physical pain, deep emotional pain when you perceive or you experience a criticism or a rejection. And the reason is quite shocking. I was lucky enough to interview William Dodson, an amazing psychiatrist, and he has been seeing ADHD patients for 30 years. And he noticed there was this exquisite response to criticism and rejection in his patients. And he theorized that ADHD kids are exposed to 20,000 extra micro rejections in their formative years, from
Wow.
0
Yeah.
to 13 years old, but it shows up before that. Comments such as, you're too much, stop fidgeting, stop biting your nails, you're too sensitive, why are you doing it like that? Stop crying, why are you so weird? Be normal. Even like non-verbal rejections, like an eye roll, 20,000 extra ones than a non-ADHD child. And they compound to create something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and it creates deep emotional pain when you experience it as an adult or a child.
Mm.
um, what it can look like, I mean, how it manifests can vary significantly often, and it's not sex specific, but often in boys you can see it come out as rage, anger, big outbursts, sudden mood shifts, or it can be very internalized. It's intense sadness, often not externalized. It can just be someone who was very chatty and contributing to the group 5 minutes ago, and then suddenly they're just non-verbal, and they're completely overwhelmed to the point where they can't contribute and they almost have a shutdown. I think how to combat it is making it commonplace and starting the conversation of RSD in the classroom, and explaining to everyone what it is and where it comes from. And yes, children with ADHD are exposed to so many extra negative comments, but they're not their fault. And therefore, RSD isn't their fault. And when
Mhm.
you feel that deep emotional pain, when somebody perhaps does criticize or rejects you, you can almost hold RSD out metaphorically in your hand because you have an understanding of it. And when you have an understanding of it, you can name it and say, this feeling I'm feeling now isn't me, like it's RSD. And that in it goes a long way to reduce the deep emotional pain in the moment and the shame that you associate with it. And also, of course, when to really encourage children to ask themselves, like, is there any evidence that actually backs up what I'm feeling? If someone says, for example, I'm too busy to do that sleepover now, and the child with ADHD has an RSD trigger and thinks that they hate them. Like, I don't believe that they're just too busy or something's come up. They literally must hate me. Then ask them, is there any evidence that actually backs that up? And there rarely is. There's often not actually a lot of evidence that contradicts what RSD is making you feel. So RSD hates evidence that contradicts it, and really encouraging everyone to look for it
Mm.
and really store it. And also, when you have an RSD episode, to really journal the process and to write down the outcomes of what actually happened in the end, because the RSD trigger can happen very quickly, but then you can also come down from it very quickly. And then you're able to look at what's happened through a clearer lens once you've regulated your nervous system. And time again, you see that your response or your reaction to that perceived comment was disproportionate and actually wasn't a true reflection of the intention of the person who said it. And if you journal each RSD episode enough, you'll eventually have this book of evidence that shows that the last, for example, 10 RSD episodes, they weren't based in reality. They were
Mm.
RSD, which is often not based in reality. And then the pattern recognition kicks in, you can almost draw on that when you're triggered again to say, look, the last 10 weren't, the person didn't actually hate me. It was RSD trying to convince me that they did. And therefore, you've got that evidence to bring you down from the deep emotional pain when it strikes again.
I love that. It's, even just looking through the chat, it's great to see so many people saying, like, wow, this makes a lot of sense for me and my own experience or their son's experience. Like, so many of us haven't necessarily heard about this aspect of ADHD or haven't been given a label to identify it by. Reflecting back on my own experiences teaching in the classroom, I can think of students who would not, they would say they hadn't done an assignment, and I would later on find that they had. It was like in their email account or in their Google Classroom, and I would be so confused, like why they weren't even handing it in when they've done all the work. And recognizing now that this was the intense fear that some of them were recognizing or feeling about being judged for that assignment, because it wasn't necessarily to the high standard that they had of themselves. And so these sometimes uh, like negative behaviors that we see, tearing up your work, refusing to hand something in, can have these other stories behind them that we might overlook accidentally as an educator. Um, I wanted to give you this opportunity because we've got a lot of educators and parents on board, and also on students who attend these conferences or watch our recordings afterwards. Are there any tips you'd like to share with educators about how better to support students with ADHD in their classrooms?
Yeah, so it's a brilliant question. And I think, firstly, it's like trying to reduce stigma against those four letters, because there is still quite a lot of stigma against them. So having just generally opening up the conversation in class, and maybe putting a poster on the wall at a very basic level, or just, as a teacher needs to show vulnerability and create a classroom where it feels safe for somebody who might be experiencing certain challenges to feel comfortable and safe to ask for support. And human beings do that when you feel like the people that will be listening to your ask relates to the struggle. So teachers don't necessarily need to say, I have ADHD. They could just perhaps say, sometimes I'm the sort of person who struggles with timekeeping, or I'm the sort of person who struggles with disorganization sometimes, or I lose focus on things if I'm not particularly interested in them. And just that conversation coming from the top, from a position of authority and leadership, i.e. the teacher, will trickle down a culture of safety that the children will pick up on, and it will enable them to feel a lot more confident to ask for support, as they'll see their struggles in the teacher, and therefore they won't feel that there's kind of this friction if they do go to them to ask for support. Lots of other things, like just normalizing the use of fidget toys and noise cancelling headphones, and recommending movement breaks and having visual reminders of the itinerary for the day, having that dialogue with a parent or a guardian so you can spot if there is a significant difference in presentation between the child at home and at school. To pick up if masking is getting too extreme, and maybe put an intervention in. I think ultimately it's encouraging children at a young as possible age to really work on their self-awareness, because children, as I said earlier, are very good at recognizing when they don't feel like they fit in, and they're very good at recognizing when they feel different. And it's human nature to adjust who you are and to change and to mask in order to soothe that feeling. It's deeply uncomfortable feeling like you don't fit in and you're kind of like othered. And as a consequence of that, you can often lose touch of who you really are as an individual. And it's very hard to make good decisions, whether you're a child or an adult, if you don't have a true understanding of what you're actually interested in. At school, that could be whether you want to do a particular sport, or take on a work assignment, or what subjects you're going to be choosing later on. Or as an adult, it's like, should I start that business, or do I want to make that friend? So you often jump into opportunities because it feels safer and less confrontational to say no. And then the honeymoon period passes, and you've perhaps lost interest in the thing, and then you're kind of stuck in the shame spiral of how do I get out of it, and also the knock-on effects of having to potentially just give up or abandon another thing. But when you
Mm.
build your self-awareness, and you can do this by encouraging children to ask themselves some really simple questions as often as they can. What did I do today that made me happy? What did I do today that made me sad? What did I do today that I found easy or challenging? What conversations or people did I walk away from feeling energized? Or what conversations or people did I walk away from feeling drained? These simple exercises can really build up a child's self-awareness and enable them to understand who they are, and make sure that that gap between their true self and their masked version, the version of themselves that they put out into the world, doesn't get too wide. Because when that gap between their true selves and the version of themselves that they put out into the world gets too wide, then we see bad outcomes. So we see them starting things that they don't finish, and abandoning projects, and feeling lonely and disconnected from and friends, and struggling to maintain friendships. But when the self-awareness is grown, then that gap between who they are and their masked version gets narrower. And really, that's like, I think the key to ADHD management at any age group is to really encourage people to work on their self-awareness and not let the mask get too thick.
Mm. Thank you. The next question I was about to ask, actually, kind of you've addressed through that. Someone was saying, what resources would you suggest for a child who wants to be entrepreneurial? But I'm hearing this idea of like encouraging them in the areas that they do feel like they're interested in, listening to that, giving them opportunities, feedback from those pieces. For our last question, I wanted to ask you, do you think that anyone who's mentoring, who's working with a student with ADHD, how can they really get to know them when they don't necessarily have that much time? How can they support them if they're mentoring a student and just have sort of pockets of opportunities to connect with someone?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of similar to the questions that one would ask themselves in trying to get to know themselves. Um, Really encourage them to open up about their knee-jerk reactions sometimes. Like, we all have signals that we give off when we see something that we're genuinely interested in and genuinely passionate about. We often suppress them because, we for example, if you're reading a newspaper and you see an advert for a musical theatre role and you really get excited about auditioning for that part, but then you remember that your dad wanted you to be a doctor, or someone said something on the playground, and you suppress that excitement towards that musical theatre role. That's like what I mean by a knee-jerk reaction. That's kind of like your inner child screaming out, trying to remind you of who you are and what you're interested in before the mask got too thick. So if I
Mm,
was getting to know someone, I would ask them, when was the last time you were truly excited?
great
When was the
question.
last time you were really anxious? When was the last time you were truly fearful? When was the last time you were truly euphoric? And you'll see their face light up, because they're not questions that people usually are asked.
Mm,
And we'll all have memories of the last time we were truly happy, or truly ecstatic, or excited, or genuinely passionate towards doing something. And also the other way, like genuinely fearful and anxious, and because they tell you just as much as the positive stuff. So those are the questions, really, really straightforward questions, like when were you last truly um, not looking forward to something, and when were you truly last looking forward to something?
Alex, I could definitely spend a whole other hour asking you questions. There were lots of things that came up in the chat and things that you've made me think about. But I know you've got another session after this on how an ADHD diagnosis brought focus to my life. So if anyone's interested in learning more from Alex, please do check out the agenda. You'll see his session starting in about 2, 3 minutes. And then we've also got a whole host of other topics depending on what areas you guys are interested in. Please do check out the conference agenda. And these sessions, like we said, have been recorded and will be available for the next 30 days on the conference website for you guys to check out. With that, I want to share a huge thank you to Alex for being such a great advocate for people with ADHD and encouraging us to learn more. And I can't wait to watch your next session. Okay, bye for now. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thanks so much. Bye bye then.
Thank you as well to our ASL interpreters and our Spanish interpreters. Bye for now.